Hello, and welcome back to That Spicy Woo Woo, where we lovingly unpack the chaos called BS on dysfunctional patterns and try collectively to stop confusing self-abandonment with being a good person. So today we're going to be talking about overfunctioning because honestly, I genuinely believe that this is one of the biggest reasons that so many women are burnt out right now and just anxious, overwhelmed, and just disconnected from themselves, basically, and constantly questioning themselves. Because I think a lot of women believe that they're just doing the right thing and just being loving when they've actually just been conditioned to overfunction. And the thing is, most people, like most women, don't actually even realize they're doing it. Like before I started unpacking all of these patterns within myself, I genuinely thought I was just emotionally intelligent and like empathetic, and just mature for my age and being caring, like all of those things. But like what I eventually actually realized is that I had actually become hyper attuned to everyone else's emotions and just became like increasingly disconnected from myself and my own needs. And like, that's a huge part of what overfunctioning actually is, because it's feeling responsible for other people and the emotional tone of a room or other people's tension in relationships, and feeling responsible for fixing that conflict and almost like explaining everyone else's behavior and trying to keep the peace, and by making sure that everyone else is okay. And I think another thing about this is that because women are so heavily conditioned into doing this like emotional labor, we often don't actually even recognize it at all. And we just think it's ourselves. Like we just think that we should help, or it's our duty to explain what's going on here in this dynamic. Or we always feel like, oh, I should be there if someone needs me. And if someone's in trouble, like I should fix this. And that's because like a lot of us learned that being needed means that we're valuable. And that's so tricky, because then you grow up and your worth has become tied to being useful instead of who you actually are. And I genuinely think that that's why so many women struggle to simply exist without feeling like they need to do something or offer something or help. Like if we're not advising someone or regulating or supporting or organizing something or just being understanding, then who actually are we? That's the thing. Like that's how deeply rooted this conditioning actually is. It's actually wild. And I think this is why I wanted to talk about this today, because I think people hear the word burnout and just assume that it means that you've been working too hard and like you just need a fucking holiday, or you just need to do more self-care at the weekend. And like, obviously, yeah, that's lovely and those things are nice, but it's so much deeper than that. Like burnout is so much deeper than that. And that's why I love talking about it, because a lot of people don't realize how deep it actually goes. It's not just surface level. It's deep patterns and conditioning that are repairable with awareness, because it comes from subconscious nervous system patterns and patterns around over responsibility and over explaining and over giving. And eventually your body like cannot sustain that level of emotional output. And that's why we end up getting burnt out. Because I also think like when people hear overfunctioning, they often just think of someone who's just being really busy. or like super productive, but it's actually much more psychological than people realize. Like it's becoming emotionally responsible for things that were never actually ever yours to be responsible for. And it can show up in literally so many ways. It's crazy. It's like over explaining yourself constantly, trying to emotionally regulate everyone around you, or even becoming like the therapist friend and being the wise one. And it's like anticipating like everyone else's needs before your own. Like you just stay on hyper alert. Like, and then you feel guilty for resting and you struggle to then ask for help. And then that means that you become hyper independent and you're then feeling responsible for everyone else's emotions and feeling uncomfortable when everyone or someone else is upset, whilst never asking for help yourself. And the problem is that a lot of women, like we growing up, like were praised for this. Like you get praised for being like reliable and selfless and just being calm and understanding. And that's why it's so embedded. Like we grew up feeling like we needed to be supportive in order to be seen. And then your nervous system just becomes absolutely tired, like exhausted. And honestly, like I think one of the biggest realizations I had was realizing that I had become like an emotional sponge, because I was like constantly absorbing tension and emotional impact for other people. Like I always absorbed other people's moods or stress. And I just held on to emotional responsibility. And because I've been doing that for so long, it just felt normal. Like I genuinely just thought, this is literally just who I am. Like this is me. But then like more and more, I realized when I started leaving these conversations, I realized like how exhausted I actually felt, even when like nothing had actually really happened, like nothing bad had actually happened. And I was like, why am I so tired all the time after even just hanging out with family or friends or just at work? I mean, obviously work, like you're busy, but in general day-to-day dynamics, I started to realize that how tired I always was after. And I realized it wasn't because I was just like having conversations. I was always explaining stuff, or I was emotionally like carrying people. And I think like a lot of women are doing this constantly without even realizing it. Like I remember one conversation I had with my mum. I think this was a few years ago, maybe last year. And she had mentioned that she'd given I think it was just 2 years ago. She mentioned that she'd given my brother a lift to the airport because he didn't want to pay for an Uber. And this is such a small example, but it's such a good example in terms of like how this shows up in the tiniest ways. Because, so she basically mentioned that she'd given my brother a lift to the airport because he didn't want to pay for an Uber. And then I was there. I stood there and I then remembered from a few years earlier when I'd needed a lift to the airport, I was told no. And so then I ended up, like at the time, I just took that no, obviously respected it. And I was like, okay. So then I ended up paying for an Uber myself, which was fine, but it was like £100, right? Which I think it was like a Sunday morning at like 6 a.m. because it wasn't even that far. I think I was going from like Bracknell to Heathrow, which, it's half an hour, I think. And it cost £100. And I just swallowed that, right? And then literally a few days or like a week later, when I then saw my parents again, I told them about how much the Uber was. And then they were judging me for how expensive it was. And I was like, well, what am I meant to do? I did ask you for a lift. Like, what? I couldn't do anything else. But anyway, that's beside the point. Like, because it wasn't even really about the airport itself. It was like the pattern underneath it. like, why does support feel available for everyone else, but then it feels a bit more complicated when it comes to me? And then so like I brought that up with my mum when she was telling me about giving my brother to a lift to the airport. And her response was just like, oh, did I? Oh, God. Yeah, I mean, it's just that kind of response is like so typical. Because I pointed it out in a more jokey way, of course, just to highlight the difference and to get clarity on why I was being treated differently. But then it's never remembered. And it's like selective amnesia. And the emotional impact of something just gets instantly dissolved before there's any actual repair or accountability. But this is what the most interesting part was, that even while I was trying to then explain why the situation had hurt me, I then caught myself reassuring her. Like I could literally feel myself trying to soften it and being like, oh, don't worry though, it's fine. Like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Like, because I felt so bad for bringing it up. And I was like emotionally like cushioning the fact that I was expressing pain and unfairness. And that was like a huge moment where I realized like, oh my God, I'm literally still managing like someone else emotionally who hurt me while I'm trying to explain why I'm hurt. And that is literally what overfunctioning is. And that's like the automatic reflex of being like an emotional sponge. And that I do genuinely think that so many women do this automatically, because you like bring up something painful and then you immediately start like softening it or minimizing it or like feeling bad, and then you start reassuring the other person, and you're trying to just basically manage their reaction to what you're saying. You're like, oh, yeah, this upset me, but I'm sorry it upset me. And I'm sorry that you're upset that I'm upset that it upset me. Do you know what I mean? And that's exhausting because you never fully just like have the feeling. You're too busy like managing everyone else's experience or like of your feeling instead. And I think like one of the most important aspects of this pattern specifically is that a lot of women learned very early on that their own sense of safety came from managing everyone else emotionally. Like I remember I was always just, I mean, when I stopped doing this, it made me realize how often I actually did do this, but I always thought if everyone else is okay, then I can finally relax. Because once I noticed that, I saw it everywhere, because I was like, if someone was upset, like I immediately wanted to fix it. Or if someone was stressed or if there was tension in a room, I immediately felt responsible and I just wanted to smooth it all over so it felt more peaceful. Or in terms of, in terms of like relationships, if someone became like emotionally distant, I would immediately go to start thinking like, what do I need to do to fix this and restore our connection? And yeah, that's so tiring, because you're constantly monitoring your environment around you. You're never actually resting and just sitting there. Your nervous system's literally always scanning other people. And I think this is why so many women don't even realize they're burnt out until their body like literally forces them to stop. And I think another big reason why that is because overfunctioning often looks like you're just being good and you're just being capable and productive and you're just being supportive, but you're like internally carrying emotional weight for everyone else around you. And I think, well, I know that a lot of this starts in childhood, like especially if you grew up around like if you had like a lot of emotional inconsistency or chaos, or if there was like a lot of conflict and unpredictability, like when you were growing up, you learn very quickly that keeping everyone emotionally okay like makes me feel safe. So then you automatically become really good at reading rooms and monitoring people and trying to anticipate everyone else's reaction. And then, of course, as a result, you then stop even noticing what you're doing. And you don't even notice that you're doing it. It just becomes like a part of your personality. Yeah, it's so wild when you then start noticing this, because then you can see yourself doing it in so many other areas. But yeah, I mean, relationships like are where this pattern becomes like the most obvious, because overfunctioning in relationships often gets mistaken for love. And yeah, I mean, I've absolutely done this myself, like especially in romantic relationships. I used to over explain constantly, like, God, crazy. Like, it's just so interesting for me to look back and remember how many times I would try and explain like where I was coming from or why I was upset or what I thought the issue was, or try and explain to them how I thought we could fix an issue, or what I even thought that they were feeling and why I thought that they were behaving that way. Because at the time I genuinely thought I was just communicating like really well and doing something good, but it was just overfunctioning, because I was just trying to carry the relationship emotionally, and I was trying to regulate the dynamic and try and create emotional safety and fix the discomfort for both people and then restore the connection. Yeah, it's exhausting. And the thing is, over explaining then just often comes from a belief that if I can just explain myself clearly enough, then maybe they'll understand me and everything will feel okay again. But honestly, most of the time it just goes in one ear and out the other. Because one of the biggest things that I've realized over the last few years is that boundaries are communicated much more powerfully through behavior than through explaining. Like, you actually don't need to emotionally exhaust yourself trying to convince people to understand you or your boundary. Like, people learn much faster through general experience and experiencing you. And they learn through like what you consistently tolerate or allow, or what you eventually walk away from, or what you actually participate in. And that genuinely was such a huge shift for me, because overfunctioning can become your identity. Like, you become the emotionally intelligent one. It's crazy. You become like the wise one, and the reliable one, and the person everyone goes to for advice. And then your ego then actually gets validation from being that person. But then the problem is, then you stop asking for help yourself, because then asking for help starts conflicting with your identity as the capable one. And then you become hyper independent. And I mean, hyper independence is just exhausting in itself, because then you end up emotionally carrying everyone else while simultaneously feeling unable to lean on anyone else yourself. And this is genuinely why I think overfunctioning sits underneath so much of female burnout, because it then creates this huge web of people pleasing and emotional suppression and perfectionism and fear of disappointing people, fear of conflict, a fear of being misunderstood, a fear of not being needed, and feeling like you have to over-explain. And the thing is, because overfunctioning is often rewarded, women don't recognize how unhealthy it's become until they're actually genuinely like depleted. Like, there were genuinely periods of my own life where I would be so burnt out, like so overwhelmed, like basically crying on the bathroom floor. And I would still show up for everyone and anyone else if they needed me. Like, that's genuinely not healthy. Like, that's purely conditioning. And I remember like friends saying to me before, like, say if they needed me for something and I was just sat there for however long listening and being there for them. And then we'd get to me and I'd tell them about what's been going on for me. And they were like, why didn't you say anything? You've actually had like so much more going on than I have. And like, to be honest, it's genuinely because I didn't even think to, because I was just so used to carrying everything, like, and just coping and just getting on with it. And I genuinely think a lot of women are living like that every single day because your identity becomes built around being the one who can actually handle everything. And then you just stop letting yourself actually be supported, because ultimately needing help then starts to feel really uncomfortable. Like, it feels like in ways that you're failing, or you're, God, yeah, if you're like, it just feels like you're being an inconvenience, basically. Even though you would literally never judge another person for needing support, which is the biggest contradiction ever. But I genuinely think that just says it all, really. And actually, I do just want to say as well that this can absolutely show up in men too. But I do think that women experience this pattern more because of the conditioning that we grow up with. Like the conditioning of being a good little girl and being praised for being helpful and emotionally available and selfless, low maintenance, and just being agreeable and accommodating. And it's sad because a lot of women were never just praised for just simply for being themselves. Like, they were just literally praised for how convenient they are. And then that creates a really confusing relationship with love, because then being loved then becomes associated with how useful you are and being available constantly and trying not to be difficult and not disappointing anyone and suppressing your feelings and your own needs. And this is where it gets really tricky, because then as you grow up, you then grow up into someone who feels really uncomfortable prioritizing herself, because you learned that if I stop performing this role, if I stop overfunctioning and stop being useful, then maybe I stop being loved. And I think this is why so many women become so exhausted without even realizing it, because they've spent years being emotionally available to everyone except themselves. Like, I remember periods in my own life where I was so disconnected, like so disconnected from my own needs. Like, I didn't even really have any idea what my needs were until a few years ago. Like, I was so disconnected that I genuinely wouldn't even notice I was overwhelmed until I genuinely physically crashed. Like, so burnt out, so stressed, so overwhelmed, like crying nonstop. And yeah, it's just wild, because then I would still show up for other people. Like, I would still answer the phone. I would still give advice. I'd still help out. I'd still make myself emotionally available. And that's because we're taught that our value only comes from being useful. It genuinely then becomes so difficult to just exist without feeling guilty. And I think that's why the pattern of overfunctioning is hard to break, because it's embedded in our identity. Like, being the wise and capable one and being reliable means that your nervous system will then start associating being needed with safety. So then the idea of actually slowing down, potentially disappointing people by setting a boundary and saying no, or needing help and prioritizing yourself, can genuinely feel terrifying at first, because it feels so unfamiliar. And in order to heal from overfunctioning is firstly becoming aware of that you're doing it, because it is so embedded in our conditioning and our identity that it's just then noticing when you're over explaining, or noticing when you're emotionally softening something and carrying other people's stuff for them, or it's like when you feel responsible for someone else and how everyone else is feeling, or it's just simply noticing when your body is exhausted, but you're still saying yes to other people and showing up for other people. Because one of the biggest things for me was learning that I don't actually need to emotionally manage everyone around me in order to feel safe. Because for most of my life, I genuinely believed that if everyone else is okay, then I could finally relax. Like if everyone was happy and calm, not upset with me or disappointed, then I could finally actually sit there and exist. But the problem with that is that you end up building your entire sense of peace around stabilizing external environments, which means your nervous system never actually gets to rest, because there will always be somebody upset or somebody emotionally unavailable or somebody projecting onto you or somebody just needing something. And then if your internal safety depends on managing that, you will just stay burnt out and exhausted. Like, I genuinely think that's why it's so important in order to actually heal, is to slowly begin bringing your attention back to yourself and asking yourself, like, what do I actually feel? Like, what do I actually need in this moment? And another thing is like actually asking, like, am I helping right? Am I helping this person because I genuinely want to, or because I feel guilty if I don't? Because then it's not genuine anyway. Or asking like, am I over explaining this because I think it's important and I value communication? Or is it because I'm genuinely terrified of being misunderstood and conflict erupting, or them not approving of me? And yeah, the thing is though, like one of the hardest parts of healing is realizing that some people, when you do start healing and you do start putting yourself first, is that some people will feel so uncomfortable because they were benefiting from the version of you that never prioritized herself and over accommodated everyone else. Like they were used to the version of you that always explained everything and was always emotionally available, and the one who always prioritized making sure everyone else was comfortable, even if you weren't. And it's really important to know that when that version of you like does start disappearing and you start noticing this pattern more, dynamics do change. But they don't always change for the worse. People just need to, that the people around you, it just takes a moment for the dynamic to catch up, to balance out again. And the people that love you, like really love you, will catch up very quickly. And of course, they might not be aware that you were actually overfunctioning in the first place because they just got used to it. But the ones that do really love you and care about you wouldn't want you to be overfunctioning anyway. But then the ones that benefited from you overfunctioning and then get annoyed, you don't want them in your life anyway. So it's brilliant to just start prioritizing yourself anyway, because then it's a great filter for who actually cares about you. And it makes it easier to then actually start setting boundaries and prioritizing yourself and just not overfunction emotionally all the time. Because I remember like I started feeling like I don't even want these people in my life anyway that were benefiting from me feeling exhausted and burnt out. So it then became a lot easier for me to set those boundaries and show up differently in other relationships, because I was filtering out people who were like relationships that were unbalanced. And I genuinely then think that another massive part of this is that you then have to grieve like a lot of these like fantasy versions of the relationships that were in your head. A lot of these relationships that you wanted them to meet you in a more healthy way. Sometimes they just can't. And then you have to grieve that. You have to grieve the potential of that. Like sometimes you just have to realize that no amount of overfunctioning can actually force another person into awareness and to emotionally meet you. And for me, that was like a huge realization, like realizing I had to stop trying to unlock people through my own self-abandonment. And I had to stop believing that if I just carried the relationship, eventually it would become safe. Because I think that's why a lot of us do overfunction, because we want the other person to meet us so badly. We don't want to grieve the potential. We can see the other person's potential so much that we just try and explain things better because we hope that if they just understood, then they'd be able to meet us. And it's realizing that you can't. You end up just being exhausted. And like when you stop, there is this like really weird moment where you don't really understand what you're supposed to do if you're not overfunctioning. Like you just feel like you should be doing something. Like when someone's talking to you about an issue, instead of automatically rushing in to fix it, you just sit and witness it instead. But even I, to this day, still struggle with this. Like it's something that I'm proactively stopping myself from doing, because my automatic reflex is to help. And sometimes the other person just needs to be witnessed. And so I make a conscious effort to just be there. And instead of like overfunctioning and fixing everything in my life, like I just rest or just exist. And I open up to actually being supported and, knowing my limits and letting myself take up space and need things from other people. Because also I think a lot of like deeper healing from overfunctioning is also connected to learning how to actually mother yourself properly, especially if you became responsible emotionally like too early in life. Because I think like a lot of women are still unconsciously like waiting for somebody else to finally show up for them emotionally and show them emotional safety that they actually needed growing up. Like they're looking for reassurance and just permission to rest and to stop having to carry everything. And I think it's really important to realize that a huge part of actually healing is becoming that for yourself and telling yourself you don't need to earn love through overfunctioning anymore and exhausting yourself. And it's then learning that you just deserve to exist when you're not in survival mode. So, yeah, I mean, if this episode resonated with you, I just really encourage you to reflect on like where in your life have you tied your worth to being needed? And where have you become so used to helping out and fixing things and being understanding and supporting others and just emotionally managing everything that you've lost connection to yourself and your own needs in the process? And just try to have a look at like where overfunctioning has become so normal and embedded in your own identity that you don't even recognize how exhausted you actually are. Because honestly, I think a lot of women are walking around believing that they're just stressed when actually they've spent years abandoning themselves in really small and socially acceptable ways that have just eventually turned into burnout. So if this is something that you're currently navigating, whether it's burnout, emotional exhaustion, on people pleasing, or just overthinking relationship patterns, or you're struggling to reconnect with yourself, this is exactly the kind of work that I support women with inside my coaching sessions and my pattern intensive sessions. And together we'll look at the deeper emotional, behavioral, nervous system and the relational patterns underneath the burnout so that you can stop constantly carrying what was never yours. in the first place. And all the information about working with me is linked in my description. But yeah, we're going to wrap this up for now. And I hope you gained a lot from this, and love you. And I'll speak to you on the next episode.